Good afternoon and welcome. I am so excited about this conversation, ensuring electrification of everything is equitable. And today we have two tremendous thought leaders joining us, Curtis Wynn, CEO of the Roanoke Electric Cooperative, and Jackie Patterson, Senior Director of the NAACP's Environmental and Climate Justice Program. Curtis, Jackie, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I think I'm going to start with probably an easy question for both of you, which is when we say ensuring electrification is equitable, what do we mean? What is energy equity? What does it look like? And what do we really mean by that term? I know you both have experiences, so I'm going to start with you, Jackie, to tell us what it means. And then Curtis, I'd love to hear from you and how do you guys think about it at Roanoke?
Thank you so much. It's good to be with you. So yeah, when we talk about energy equity, we also talk a lot about energy justice, which, like environmental justice, is kind of the unequal distribution of the benefits and burdens of energy. And energy and equity, similarly, is really talking about how the extent to which there is equitable distribution of the benefits of the of electricity. And so we know that right now we have the challenges around some communities that are bearing the brunt of the negative impacts of the way we generate electricity, and so that is obviously unequitable. And we also know that there are many of the same communities are the ones that don't have equitable access to electricity. So whether they're suffering from shutoffs, or unable to afford electricity and making hard choices around electricity. And so when we think about the new energy economy, where we're trying to electrify everything, we want to make sure that access and affordability is at the foreground of how we do that. And so when we think about equity going forward, we want to make sure that everyone has access to electricity, that they can afford the electricity, that they have consistent access, that the way we generate electricity is not harming anyone in terms of pollution, that's harming environmental health for communities or harming the planet. We also want to make sure that the economic opportunities in the new energy economy, both in terms of jobs, business opportunities, and otherwise, are available to all. So, thank you.
So that is a mouthful, Jackie, and I'm going to repeat because you covered a lot of ground there. You're talking about access, you're talking about affordability, you're talking about sharing of benefit as well as burden, and you're talking about economic opportunity. Did I hit all four of them?
Yes.
So, Curtis, these are issues that, before we started talking about energy equity, you've been confronting every day in your role at Roanoke. Would be really interested to hear from you as this new conversation has been evolving, how you think about these issues.
Jackie covered it well. We have been, because of the location where we are, and as a utility serving a very costly membership or consumer base in a low and moderate income area. We kind of see it as removing barriers from a utilities perspective, and meeting consumers where they are. And that sometimes involves providing a cadre of services that benefit them in particular in their situation, whatever that finds themselves in. And obviously, the utility is not able to do this in a way that will shift the cost from one consumer to the other. But we know from experience that we have the ability to do both. We can meet the unique needs of our member consumers and avoid cross-subsidization. And at the same time, we've proven that in some instances, the utility can save money in the process. Roanoke Electric was one of the first utilities in the country to incorporate the PAYS system. I heard Mr. Shaw say that earlier in his presentation. We adopted our own Upgrade to Save program, where we actually removed one of the barriers, which is the upfront cost burden of low and moderate income consumers who are struggling to pay their bills because of the enormity of those bills. We saw consumers come through the door with bills as high as $600 per month. And it was mainly due to the poorly insulated homes, inefficient heating and cooling, the appliances that they were using, whether it be space heating or oven heating or baseboard heating, expensive fuel. So we work to offset those barriers and use the cooperatives balance sheet to take care of some of those upfront investments, while at the same time creating an environment or a situation where the savings that were generated could allow them to pay us back, and at the same time become more comfortable, as well as reduce the cost of electricity, which is a major burden. Now we're trying to spread that among other portions of our operations, like electric mobility, and just mainly trying to deal with those daily pocketbook issues that our member consumers face on a daily basis. So in a nutshell, it means just being innovative and removing barriers.
So Curtis, you referred to one big barrier, right, which is affordability. Jackie, you referred to it as well. I'm wondering, are there other barriers and challenges that we need to have at top of mind as we think about what a just transition looks like?
Jackie, you want me to go first, or you want to start? Okay. Well, there are some, again, from the utilities perspective, many of my colleagues across the country have made some very long-term investments in energy that's not considered clean. So how do you transition? How do you avoid the unintended consequences of the additional costs? As an electric utility, electric cooperative, those costs go straight to the member consumer. And if we strand those investments, they still have to be paid for. So I know that's something we are very concerned about, and trying to find creative ways to make that doable. And then from a general perspective, you want to make sure, as we transition to the new sources of energy like solar and batteries, that there is some planning on the back end of that doesn't create another situation, such as how do you dispose of those spent materials that are used to create that energy. And then, of course, most importantly, from a member consumer perspective, making sure that all of your consumers are able to transition and able to be a part of this new energy environment that we're finding ourselves in. And, what we're seeing with that is that distributed energy resources is the rule of the day. And to really get connected and be a part of that, another big barrier that we see is rural broadband. And in the rural areas that we serve, many of the members and consumers don't have access to broadband, which takes them out of the equation as it pertains to participating and being a part of the overall transition. So those are some of the things that come to my mind at the very top.
Jackie, and before you answer, I'm going to expand on the question for you, because you're close to these communities, and you highlighted in your initial comments about shutoffs, cost, environmental, but communities are confronted with lots of different issues. And so for those companies that are embarking on this, what advice would you give us into how do we engage with these communities in a way that we do have a just transition when it's all done?
Thank you. So one of the things that I would love to see is an expansion of the models of the Roanoke cooperative. I'd love to see more when we talk about a distributed system, also a distribution of ownership of our energy systems. So I would love to see more of a rural electric co-op or co-op models in general, so that we have our energy systems that are focused on, that are consumer owned and consumer led, so that the emphasis for the electricity sector is to provide affordable, accessible energy, versus with some of the models we have a focus on profits, and pretty significant profits, while at the same time we have people having their electricity shut off for non-payment and actually paying the price of poverty with their very lives. So for us, from a civil rights perspective, we feel strongly about the need to prioritize human rights and well-being in how we provide this essential resource for life. So that would be a strong emphasis that we would put to your question.
Thank you. And in that response, Jackie, you've identified yet another challenge. And I'm sure, Curtis, this is something that you've also been dealing with and thinking about this last year. Certainly from the pandemic, we've seen a shift that energy now has become a right, not a need, not something nice to have, but it is a right. And so As you think about, Curtis, this transition and electrifying everything, what are the roles that industry can play, particularly in energy as a right backdrop? And how, as the leader, have you been rethinking or expanding your thinking on your role and the role that Roanoke can play specifically in this time?
Yeah, that right is it leads me right to the thinking of inclusion. And one of the things that was specific in my role as America's Electric Co-op's board president was to really start getting us to focus more on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and incorporating it as a business imperative around making sure that we understand how broad this subject is, and hopefully getting more of the cooperatives and utility businesses in general to understand that through this effort of being inclusive, we can be better as organizations. So that's one role that the industry can play, is to be more open to understanding the differences and the barriers and the needs of all of our consumers, and how not doing that can cost us in the long run. And in particular, another area that as businesses that we can focus is what I call cross-sector collaboration. Leveraging resources that we need to address this transition in the energy industry is probably as consistent with the healthcare sector and the education sector. The cost of excluding people is enormous, and we have to recognize that and look at it from a business perspective. Then, of course, leveling the playing field by making sure everyone has access. And we saw firsthand during the last 12 to 14 months, I should say, how the lack of broadband has been a major, major issue that has crippled us in so many ways that I've already mentioned.
So, that's a great point, Curtis. Jackie, as you think about, and you laid out, I think, a future state where consumers may have more ownership in traditional utility companies. That's how I'll describe it. But as we're moving towards, if we do get to a place where we electrify everything in this transition, what should we be doing now? My concern is always that we wait until it's over and then we get started. What should we be doing now as industry, and as well as consumers now, to see the kind of end game that we'd like to have?
Yeah, so we talked a lot about community driven participatory planning. And one thing that we do need to make sure that people understand is what this is, what it means to electrify everything. So I think certainly consumer community education is important, because if we talk about inclusion, then we want to make sure that people are equipped to be able to fully participate and be decision makers in the new energy economy. So for us, that's critical. Making sure that we provide the pathways and the mechanisms for community involvement in input, design, and decision making around this major shift that really is going to change everything. So again, like you said, we don't want this to happen to people. We want people to be driving this transition, and to really see that this transition is better for us all. And then with that, we also have to establish community driven principles around this. So what are the priorities that we want in this? Again, availability, affordability, um, clean clean processes and so forth. So, and how do we prioritize and making sure we have a hierarchy of what's critical in this electrification process, so that again, it's not something where the needs of the community and the rights of the community are at the bottom of the pyramid.
And Curtis, I wondered if you could expand in your experience at Roanoke, because you guys are a leader and, one of the first to decide, let's put in broadband for consumers when others weren't doing it. What are those things that maybe caught you off guard or that you were surprised by that can help inform other leaders as they go down this path for a transition? What can they take from what you've already been through?
Yeah, well, the first fallacy I think is to assume that this transition to telecommunications in rural areas is going to be identical to the way we did electricity back in the 30s. and to understand the differences that with telecommunications and broadband, we do have competition and it's vicious. So I think we have to go in eyes wide open that no matter how dire the needs are and how neglected those rural communities have been over the years, there's still going to be barriers placed in front of us by the incumbent telecommunications providers that will make it very tough. So we have to go in with a competitive mindset, and we've got to be twice as vicious as we were in the 30s to really make it work. But at the end of the day, it's truly worth it. So what I'm seeing is that there's a blend and there's cross sections between the telecommunications and our business and our core business. And we've got to make sure we bring that all at one time to get as much leveraging opportunity as we can out of this transition. So that's the biggest advice I'd give is just come in ready to scrap. It's not going to be easy.
Ready to scrap. I like that. Jackie, what advice would you give? I'm ready to scrap now, but what else should we be doing?
Thank you. I think definitely thinking about multi-solving. Like, how do we address with the various challenges of society? How do we ensure that we are intersectional in our approach? Is what I would say, sure, for sure. So as we think about the new energy economy, how do we ensure that not only do we have access as consumers, but as job seekers, how do we ensure that there is a smooth and robust transition for people who are transitioning from the fossil fuel sector into this new energy economy? How do we make sure that everyone is held in that process? And so, yes, multi-solving and keeping multiple needs in mind as we design solutions.
And my final question, and you both have alluded to kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how do we ensure that everybody is a full participant. And so the question that I have for each of you is why? Why is energy equity important? Why have you each made it a priority in your own work? And what do you think the result would be if we don't do it? And Curtis, you alluded to it, so I just want you to be a little bit more specific. What happens if we don't do this?
Well, if we don't do it, we first of all, what we call the digital divide today is exponentially worse for the energy divide to take the same pathway because there's so much hinging around energy that's not an option. As we said earlier, it is a right. So if we leave anyone out of the equation, it's going to be devastating for those who are left out of the equation. And it's going to cost business because it's not good business to do that. I think we're proving ourselves over and over again that by being exclusive, we're costing ourselves while we're putting an extra burden on others.
Thanks. And Jackie, you get the final word.
Wow, that's a big burden. Yeah, so, and an opportunity. I would say that, no, I just lost my track. That as we think about this, we need to keep in mind that 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 there's a abundance, and that there's no, a lot of times people think that there's an inverse relationship between their well-being and someone else's well-being, that it is possible for us to do this and for us to have an energy economy that works for everyone. And that when we all thrive, we all thrive. You know, no one wants to watch the sad stories on the news. No one wants to see a story where someone's house is burned down because they used a candle to light their home because they didn't have electricity, or they used a space heater because their oil and gas was shut off. We know that we can do this. We know that there is abundance of resources, and we know that we can all do well and have the electricity that we need to thrive. And so, why not? Is more my question. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Curtis. You both know that this is my life's work, so I'm so excited to have you both here. Curtis, I am ready to scrap. Jackie, I know you're ready to scrap, and so I'll turn it back to the folks at Verge. And I hope all of you out in our audience, you guys are ready to scrap too. Let's get to work. Thanks.